Up till only 300 years ago, Chat moss was one of the largest lowland raised bogs in England. This primeval habitat and landscape was completely destroyed during the Industrial Revolution, but is now the scene of a major landscape and ecosystem restoration programme. I am a long-term volunteer with Lancashire Wildlife Trust and a research student at Manchester Metropolitan University. My project is based around a species reintroduction of the large heath butterfly. Understanding the historical ecology of Chat moss is important to this project and all of the other species reintroduction work. My thanks to everyone who has contributed to this project, staff at MMU, Lancashire Wildlife Trust practitioners, and also the small army of volunteers who have worked on the Chat moss project and made it possible. Historically, Chat moss was a huge wilderness area situated at the Lancashire-Cheshire border. The area became the epicentre of the Industrial Revolution because of the proximity of the South Lancashire coalfield and salt mining areas of Cheshire. There was rapid urban development during the 1800s and the construction of the Liverpool to Manchester Railway, which was one of the defining events in the destruction of Chat moss. Peatland conservation has gained prominence in recent years because of the importance of carbon sequestration and storage within wetlands, and also the rich biodiversity within the peatland environment. Over 99% of lowland raised bog in England has been degraded or destroyed, making this a rare biotope. Sphagnum moss is the keystone species. As the plant grows upwards, the lower part of the stem and leaves die, but do not decompose, the sequestered carbon being stored over millennia. The key to this process is the unique biochemistry of sphagnum, which produces highly acidic, anaerobic, low nutrient conditions, which inhibits the microbial decomposition of plant and animal material. The slow process of peat formation can be seen in this peat block, with living sphagnum becoming necrotic and then pickling and becoming preserved to form new peat over 30 to 40 years. Zooming out, you can see the rather wonderful place in the Trough of Bowland where we were collecting plant specimens to take back to Chat moss. Lindau Man, discovered in a peat bog near Wilmslow in South Manchester, is a famous example of a bog body having been preserved for 2,000 years in the peat. The Glen Affric tartan is the oldest example of a Scottish tartan that has been discovered, dating back about 500 years, having been preserved in the peat. One of my PhD chapters concerns the historical ecology and dissection of the Chat moss ecosystem. The article was passed through peer review at the end of last year. Historical ecology involves piecing together an understanding of past landscapes and ecosystems from multiple sources of information. Written accounts from the time of the Industrial Revolution are typically very anthropocentric, with any mention of natural history and wildlife being fairly incidental. Most historical reports of Chat moss write the area off as a wasteland. The first detailed description of the moss was given by Daniel Defoe in the 1720s. He describes an impenetrable wilderness measuring 5 to 6 miles east to west and up to 8 miles from north to south. Most of the old books from the 1800s are concerned with the progress of the Industrial Revolution. The construction of the Liverpool to Manchester Railway during the 1820s provides one of the best sources of written descriptions of the nature of chat moss. Prior to the construction of the railway during the 1820s, there were piecemeal attempts to drain and convert to agriculture areas of the periphery of the moss. However, these were only partially successful because of the difficulties in maintaining landscape-wide drainage. The construction of the railway was a massive civil engineering project, and Stevens had access to large amounts of capital and manpower in order to accomplish his task. As can be seen in this photograph, deep drainage was instilled across both sides of the railway line, and this started the process of drying out the mossland. The work was difficult and dangerous. However, George Stephenson's measurements of peat depth and the elevation of the raised bog give us direct evidence that what is now simply an area of deep peat soil was actually a massive lowland raised bog only 200 years ago. These two maps show the change in the landscape to the west of the city of Salford over the past 200 years. The 1829 map was made as part of the railway project and shows the mosslands in a more or less intact state. The green arrow shows the perspective of the woodcut in the previous slide. Holcroft moss, SSI, shown in green on the two maps, is the only area of uncut peat on the whole of the Manchester mosslands, and it is only about 400 metres across. Ancient place names speak to a world before widespread human influence. To the west side of Chat Moss is Little Woolden, which in the Anglo-Saxon dialect was called Wolferdenu or Wolves Valley. At the south side of the map is Bealfourness or Beaver Headland in Anglo-Saxon Old English. The Manchester Ship Canal was constructed during the 1890s and completely changed the configuration of the River Mersey and Irwell, removing all of the huge meanders in the rivers. The completeness of the ecosystem destruction is quite unusual. Most habitats at least survive in small fragments. This graph compares the land area of Chat Moss with historical events over the past 500 years. Shown on the left, the milestones in the industrialisation of the area, and on the right, the progressive loss of species. Sphagnum moss, which is, as we've said, the keystone species for the moss, was last recorded in 1871 and not seen again until 1989. Looking in more detail at the river systems, the meandering River Mersey and River Irwell are shown here, with the River Bollin joining the Mersey at the south edge of the map. The Ship Canal has completely altered the configuration of these rivers, and a current day picture of Earlham area showing housing development on what would have been the old floodplain of the river, with the water table dropped 3 to 4 metres below the ground level. This early Ordnance Survey map shows the Biotope area with the River Bollin flowing north from Cheshire into the Mersey. There was an area of wet woodland with a river meander running through it, which would have been superb beaver habitat up until the Middle Ages. Fast forwarding to the present day, the Mersey has been canalised and the huge oxbows have been lost. Before Ness is now simply farmers' fields. You can see the Thirlwall Viaduct on the M6 crossing over the whole span of the river. Something that has puzzled me is Daniel Defoe's description of the north-south dimension of Chat Moss being 8 miles or approximately 10 kilometres, which seems like an overestimate. I've put some spot heights on this map around the area at the head of the River Glaze and Black Moss Brook, which show a shallow valley, almost like a basin, with very low gradients. Current picture of Black Moss Brook showing that this small brook at the northern edge of the moss has now been canalised and straightened, and you can see a large land drain in the field to the right showing the ongoing strenuous efforts that are required to keep the area drained. This is one of the nature reserves on Chat Moss, an area of willow carr with sphagnum moss growing in a peaty basin under the willow. And this is the sort of terrain which would have covered much of this area of northern England before all the trees were cleared. Other areas on the nature reserve with a mixture of rush, fen, reed bed, open water and a scrubby woodland. And this is again probably very much what this area was like hundreds of years ago. The area that I've marked in blue would very have easily been flooded if you added beaver into the equation, putting dams every 100 metres or so along all of those small streams. It's interesting to notice the bit of Chat Moss peatland projecting up into the very north of this map, which is at the highest point of Black Moss Brook. Peat normally forms in hollows, so there must have been some other process going on to keep this area wet and waterlogged to initiate peat formation. There's been a lot of research in recent decades looking at the influence of beaver on peatland formation, which has been possible with increasing beaver populations in North America and Europe. 300 years ago, the River Irwell was a pretty river, according to contemporary accounts, with beautiful countryside on either side, pleasure boats running up and down the river. If you just make a mental note of the skyline and the church spire, we can run to another painting from 200 years later, showing the same piece of river with the same skyline and church spire, now heavily industrialised and polluted with a lot of coal burning and atmospheric pollution. The role of coal burning and metal smelting has been linked to the destruction of the blanket bogs in the Pennines. The photograph here of a lead mining area, and lead ore is lead sulfide, so huge amounts of sulphur pollution coming out of the smelting process. There was metal smelting in Merseyside, and here's evidence of a local steelworks, which is just on the south edge of Chat Moss. R.A. Smith was a chemist who worked in the northwest of England during the 1800s and did early research on the effects of pollution, coining the phrase acid rain in his 1872 book. At the time, there was a completely unregulated chemical engineering industry in the area, which produced huge amounts of pollution. Merseyside was one of the largest sulphur polluters in England, and this would have had a huge impact on the local mosslands, with sphagnum moss being very vulnerable to atmospheric pollution. Air quality has improved significantly over the course of the 1900s and especially in recent decades, and is now really quite good, with lichens and mosses reappearing. There has been a decades-long peatland restoration scheme going on Chat Moss since the 1980s, which is currently gaining momentum. Records of species presence within the area is invaluable for guiding the restoration process and the reintroduction of plants and other organisms. This page from Travis's Flora of South Lancashire is invaluable. There are now sundews growing on the mossland, including oblong leaf sundew, which is nationally rare. Also other rare plants such as white-beaked sedge and bog asphodel, adding to colour and variety. The first record of large heath butterfly in England was in 1795, when it was described as the Manchester Argus. There are now searchable records of large heath butterfly and other peatland Lepidoptera in the NBN Atlas. This gives confidence that reintroducing the large heath butterfly to the area is appropriate. There are now well over 1,000 acres of wetland nature reserve in the area, which is forming part of a newly formed National Nature Reserve. Hopefully these reserves can be improved and expanded going into the future.